In the 1984 Insta-classic Gremlins from acclaimed master of horror Joe Dante, a small town is besieged by little monstrous creatures at Christmas time after a boy is gifted an exotic pet that he neglects to care for properly, subsequently unleashing creepy caroling chaos. A zeitgeist-defining moment that spawned a lot of imitators, including the likes of ghoulies, munchies, critters, and even elves, which we told you all about last week. Gremlins was a benchmark moment in creature features, proving that fun and fright could also be quite festive. But did you know that the origins of these little green guys goes back much farther than the Steven Spielberg-produced film that stole our hearts? Greetings and welcome to the History of Fright. I'm your host, Michael Varrati. Despite their rise to prominence at the movies, Gremlins actually entered the consciousness of public folklore nearly 60 years prior to their savaging of the silver screen. The concept of a gremlin, a term thought to come from an Old English phrase meaning to vex, is believed to have first appeared in the 1920s, utilized by post-World War I British pilots stationed around Europe and the Middle East. Members of the Royal Air Force, otherwise known as the RAF, would tell tales of little creatures that would intentionally and mischievously sabotage an aircraft to the detriment of a pilot in flight. In an early era of aviation, when the mechanics of flight must have seemed like science fiction to most, there's little doubt that there had to be a lot of trial and error before taking to the skies was the much safer practice it is today. Whether the tales of these creatures that were shared among pilots was actually superstition born out of fear of unpredictable new technology, or just colloquial urban legend meant to rib one another, the impact on folklore was the same, and gremlins were born.
Welcome aboard, Gremlin Air.
Following the introduction of these little creatures in the 20s, the unfortunate outbreak of World War II served as a catalyst for the spreading of the gremlin myth from a localized legend to a verified zeitgeist talking point. As RAF pilots traversed across Europe and the globe, they shared stories of gremlins' interference in their missions. A key aspect to this military bunker version of a spooky campfire tale was the notion that gremlins were impartial and did not care about the wars of men. The little beasties were thought to be equal opportunity offenders, attacking the Allies and Axis alike. Some historians and folklorists theorize that by telling tales of gremlins as a common foe, it allowed the enlisted soldiers a brief moment of psychological reprieve by imagining a world where the enemy was not their fellow man. Meanwhile, others think the creation of the myth allowed soldiers to keep morale up by not placing the blame for failures in the heat of battle on one another, but rather on unseen creatures they could laugh off. Because of these ties to the industry of war and the gremlins' close association with interfering with technology, folklorist John Hazen once wrote that the creatures were a unique phenomenon and likely the first mythical monsters of the machine age, if not the most significant. However, despite their wartime origins, the larger popularization of gremlins beyond the front lines is actually owed to one of the world's most famous children's authors, Roald Dahl. That's right, the creator of Matilda, Willy Wonka, and the Fantastic Mr. Fox had a strong hand in bringing these pint-sized terrors to the masses. A former military man and member of the RAF himself, Roald Dahl had been the survivor of an airplane crash in the Western Desert, an event that naturally had impact on the young author. When he left the armed services, Dahl set out to write a novel for children. Already familiar with the tales of mischievous creatures passed around the military and how it had been applied to his own aircraft accident, Dahl brought those concepts to his new project. Thus, in 1943, Dahl's first children's book, aptly titled The Gremlins, was published. The release of Dahl's book, as well as tales from soldiers finally returning home from war, broke the concept of gremlins out into the wider public consciousness. And, as with most good ideas, Hollywood soon came calling. From as early as the manuscript phase of Dahl's Gremlins, there was interest in turning the story into a film property. One such individual who was keen on adapting the material was none other than Walt Disney himself. It was announced early on with the novel's publication that Gremlins would soon be a Walt Disney feature, and the subsequent press at the time only helped further the public's interest in the little monsters. Unfortunately, as happens to be the case with Hollywood sometimes, the Disney Doll Gremlins feature never quite came to fruition. However, born from that project, a series of shorts from Disney featuring a cartoon character named Gremlin Gus helped keep the idea fresh in the minds of audiences. At the same time, the folks over at Warner Brothers released a Merry Melodies cartoon starring Bugs Bunny called Falling Hair, which saw everyone's favorite carrot-chomping rabbit doing battle on an airfield with a gremlin. With pop culture titans like Mickey and Bugs calling, it was clear gremlins were here to stay. And though Dahl's initial feature film never saw the light of day, from that point onward, gremlins got plenty of screen time. Perhaps the most notable appearance from a gremlin on screen prior to Joe Dante's reinvention of the creature in the 80s was the 1963 episode of The Twilight Zone titled Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. The episode, featuring a beleaguered William Shatner as a nervous airplane passenger who believes he sees a gremlin on the wing of the plane, was instantly iconic and became such a pop culture reference point that it has since been homaged and parodied by properties as diverse as The Simpsons, Saturday Night Live, and even Dragon Ball Z. Nightmare at 20,000 Feet was so beloved that it was even remade in 1983 by Mad Max director George Miller as part of the Twilight Zone movie project. This time it was TV favorite John Lithgow facing off with a much more malevolent version of the killer plane passenger. Both the Shatner and Lithgow versions of the story and their aviation setting were key homages in bringing gremlins back to their roots. Now Naturally, the notion of gremlins forever changed with the release of Joe Dante's film and its subsequent sequel, Gremlins 2, The New Batch. And now our concept of what a gremlin can be is as tied to Christmas time malarkey as it is to malfunctioning jet engines. But maybe that's the gremlin's greatest strength. Just like the machine age from which they were born, perhaps the gremlin is always evolving, upgrading, and changing to find new ways of causing mischief. As we head into the holiday season, take a moment to consider the rich history of these little terrors, and remember, if the lights on your tree flicker just a bit or your car doesn't want to start in the snow, maybe it's just bad luck. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a gremlin. Until next time.